3,000 years. That's how long ancient Egypt dominated the world. Pharaohs who built monuments that still stand today. A civilization so advanced it felt eternal. And then it vanished. Not from war, not from invasion. Egypt destroyed itself. And the way it happened, nobody saw it coming. Picture this. You're standing in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza, 4,500 years old. Still there. Still perfect. Ancient Egypt felt like that, permanent, untouchable, divine. For millennia, Egypt was the superpower of the ancient world. While other civilizations rose and fell, Egypt just kept going. The Nile flooded every year like clockwork. The pharaohs ruled like gods. The temples overflowed with gold. But by 30 BC, it was over. The last pharaoh was dead. Egypt became a province of Rome. The temples were abandoned. The hieroglyphs were forgotten. The civilization that seemed immortal just stopped existing. So what happened? How does the greatest civilization in human history simply collapse? The answer is darker than any curse. And it all started with the one thing Egypt thought would never fail them. Everything about ancient Egypt came down to one river, the Nile. It wasn't just important. It was everything. Egypt existed because of the Nile. Without it, there's just desert. Every summer, like magic, the Nile would flood. Water would cover the fields, deposit rich black soil, then reseed. Farmers would plant. Crops would explode. Egypt would eat. The cycle repeated for thousands of years without fail. This wasn't luck. This was Egypt's entire identity. The pharaoh's legitimacy came from maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order. As long as the Nile flooded, the pharaoh was doing his job. The gods were happy. Egypt prospered. But here's what nobody talks about. That cycle created a fatal weakness. Egypt became completely dependent on something it couldn't control. One bad flood? Manageable. Two bad floods? Concerning. Multiple years of failed floods? Catastrophic. And that's exactly what happened. Around 2200 BC, during what historians call the First Intermediate Period, the Nile stopped flooding properly. Not for 1 year. For decades. The perfect system Egypt built over centuries just broke. Imagine being an Egyptian farmer. Your entire life, your father's life, your grandfather's life, the Nile flooded. Always. It was as certain as the sun rising. Then 1 year it doesn't. The water level stays low. The fields stay dry. You think it's temporary. Next year will be normal. But next year is worse. And the year after that. The crops fail. The granaries empty. People start starving. This wasn't a small problem. This was existential. Egypt's population depended on those floods. No floods meant no food. No food meant no Egypt. The central government in Memphis tried to maintain control. But how? The pharaoh's entire authority rested on maintaining cosmic order. If the Nile wasn't flooding, what did that say about the pharaoh? Either the gods abandoned him, or he wasn't really divine. Either way, his power evaporated. Regional governors called nomarchs saw their chance. If the pharaoh couldn't make the Nile flood, why follow him? They stopped sending taxes to Memphis. They built their own armies. Egypt, unified for centuries, fractured into competing kingdoms practically overnight. The archaeological evidence is brutal. Mass graves, cannibalism, letters begging for food. One inscription reads, "All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger, to such a degree that everyone had come to eating his children." Egypt eventually recovered. Strong pharaohs reunified the country. The Nile floods returned to normal. The Middle Kingdom rose. Everything seemed fine again. But Egypt never learned the real lesson. They rebuilt the exact same system with the exact same vulnerability. All in on the Nile. No backup plan. No diversification. Just faith that the river would behave. And for a while it did. The Middle Kingdom flourished. Massive building projects. Expanded trade networks. Literature and art thrived. Egypt looked invincible again. Then around 1650 BC, it happened again. Climate shifts. The Nile failed. Famine returned. And just like before, the central government collapsed. This time, foreign invaders called the Hyksos walked into a weakened Egypt and took over the northern part of the country. The mighty Egypt conquered by outsiders. Unthinkable. The new kingdom pharaohs eventually drove out the Hyksos and restored Egyptian power. Ramesses II built monuments everywhere proclaiming eternal dominance. Egypt seemed back on top, but the cracks were showing. Each collapse weakened the foundation. Each recovery cost more resources, and Egypt's neighbors were getting stronger. Around 1200 BC, the entire Mediterranean world imploded. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. Mighty empires just vanished within decades. The Hittites? Gone. Mycenaean Greece? Destroyed. Trade networks? Collapsed. Egypt survived barely, but it was never the same. Ramesses III fought off waves of invaders called the Sea Peoples, but the wars drained the treasury. The economy struggled. The government couldn't pay workers. Even the builders of the royal tombs went on strike, the first recorded labor strike in history. The pharaohs kept building temples and claiming divine power, but it was theater. Behind the scenes, Egypt was hollow. The priesthood grew more powerful than the pharaohs. Corruption exploded. The government sold off resources to foreign merchants just to stay afloat. And the Nile? Still unpredictable. Bad floods still triggered famines. But now Egypt didn't have the resources to recover. Each crisis hit harder than the last. By the time Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, Egyptians almost welcomed it. The Persian Empire had already conquered them. The pharaohs were foreign rulers anyway. At least Alexander respected Egyptian culture. The Ptolemaic dynasty that followed was Greek, not Egyptian. They spoke Greek. They worshipped Greek gods alongside Egyptian ones. They ruled from Alexandria, a Greek city. Egypt had become a prize for foreign empires to fight over. The final blow came with Cleopatra VII. She tried to play Rome's civil war to Egypt's advantage. She backed Mark Antony against Octavian. She lost. In 30 BC, after her death, Octavian annexed Egypt as a personal province of Rome. Egypt, the civilization that lasted 3,000 years, was over. Not because of one catastrophic event, but because of accumulated fragility. Every collapse weakened it. Every recovery cost more. Eventually, there was nothing left to recover. Here's the brutal truth about Egypt's collapse. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the gods abandoning them. It was structural. Egypt built an entire civilization on one perfect assumption that the Nile would always flood. When that assumption broke, everything else broke with it. They had 3,000 years to diversify, to build resilience, to prepare for the unpredictable. Instead, they doubled down on the same system every time. And every collapse proved they were wrong. The saddest part? Egypt didn't fall to better civilizations. Rome didn't have superior culture or technology. They just had something Egypt lost: adaptability. The temples still stand. The pyramids still tower over the desert. But the civilization that built them, it forgot the most important lesson.